This is Marvin L. Storm with our podcast here. We're here talking to Tom Hine. Tom, would you mind sharing a little bit about your background and how you sort of got in the wealth management business and kind of your philosophies and some of the other things that you've learned of your time in this business that you've been involved in for how many years now?
It's 25 years. So yeah, I always like to start with a little story on this, true one. So back when I grew up outside of Boston, Massachusetts, I now live in Connecticut, but back when I was growing up outside of Boston, my mom and dad would often talk about stocks over the dinner table. And years ago, before I ever got into business, my mom, to her credit, got my dad, he had bought some technology company that made a lot of money. And she said, having grown up in the Great Depression, she said, you know what? Cash out when you can, take the money off the table. And my dad, being the typical maybe male investor, thought, well, this thing will go forever. But she convinced him correctly to sell that particular stock. It was a computer company years ago. And two things happened. First, about a year after they sold it, the company almost went bankrupt. It went down. They would have lost all their money. But to my mom's credit, they sold it. And then they took that money and they invested in property in Cape Cod. So as a teenager, growing up before I went to college, I watched this with fascination, this financial transaction where my mom's skill set at saying, take the money and run, and my dad's wisdom to buy the stock had this great effect. It was a positive story. So when I went to undergrad at University of Connecticut, I studied finance. I went back to get my MBA. And even though I went to work right away for Accenture Consulting, which was then Arthur Andersen, in the back of my mind, that story about how mom and dad together made a very smart investment decision that kept resonating with me. And finally, I decided I would make the leap into, at the time, we were being trained by insurance companies. So they taught us about life insurance, long-term care, and disability. But then that industry in the mid-90s exploded into what we now call wealth management. So you might have started off in one field, but then it became a very, very big business in what they call asset gathering. But it all started from the dinner table where mom and dad made this great decision on their own. And actually, I might add, what was more ironic, the broker that they had at the time, and I won't mention the firm, but it's a very well-known firm, the broker actually told them not to buy that stock, and they did. And when the stock took off, the broker bought it for him and his own customers. So my dad often joked and said, hey, I didn't get a commission, for that recommendation. And in the end, they sold out when the broker told them. So it was a very interesting story, too, of how the average middle-class working family did a better job than the professional advisor. And I never let that story either, I never forgot that along my career, because sometimes people can have a very important gut instinct, and all the knowledge and credentials in the world doesn't necessarily, equate to a better judgment. So that's what got me started. And then along the way, I learned about acquisitions through Accenture, and then eventually I did my first acquisition many years ago. But it all started from the kitchen table.
As you look over your career, kind of what are some of the personal characteristics, that have, given you additional insights and strengthen your ability to support your clients and become successful in the wealth management business?
Yeah, so one of them, believe it or not, is my study of martial arts. I started in college in the late 70s, early 80s, and I got into Shotokan karate, which is taught around the world. And I trained for many, many years and actually got to a world tournament where I competed in the early 90s in Japan. So that discipline, and anyone that does, whether it's tennis or skiing or yoga, whatever you name, if everyone has, or running, runnings are a very popular one. That discipline, believe it or not, along the way helped me become a more disciplined wealth advisor. And that meant that you sometimes have to give the clients the bad news early on. And that was very difficult for me to do because I'm an optimist. So I think, number one, it helped me become true to myself and true to my clients. And number two, where the discipline really paid off was when the stock markets went through their wild swings. I always had a system in place, to manage their money that would calm them down and maybe remove not all, but some of the anxiety of that, especially when you look at what happened in the last, couple of months or couple of years. So the martial arts was a big component. And the second thing for me was, believe it or not, having grown up with a handicapped sister who was handicapped since birth, always known that there was another person out there that I would someday want to help my older sister and I, help take care of. Amy was also a driver. I don't talk a lot about that with my clients, but that caretaker role, the nurturing role of somebody taking charge and watching over, being the steward for people's money, that was sort of instinctive in me just because of some of the childhood and family issues we felt. So between the martial arts and my sister Amy, those were two big drivers of that. And then along the way, of course, a lot of other people, coaching programs and mentors really helped me take my idea and help it grow to where it is today.
And you look back over your career, what are some of your biggest accomplishments that you've can point to in your career that's benefited yourself and your clients?
Yeah, so the first one, without a doubt, was properly making the shift, as we all did in the 1980s or 90s, from the commission-based world where every trade you made, you got a commission, to what we call the fiduciary or fee-based model, where you're charging an annual fee. So as you do better for your clients, you do better for yourself and your firm. So a lot of advisors recognized that early on, that shift to fee basis was huge. And that's pretty much the standard today. The second thing I would say was very important was always keeping my eyes open to innovation and change. And that may have been because of martial arts, because early on, I recognized the ability to look at other ways to manage money. And one of them became what's called charting software that's well known on Wall Street. So charting software is a different way to manage money than the traditional buy and hold. And that was a huge leap for us in 2008, 2009, during the great financial crisis. We sort of zigged when everyone else zagged, and it really helped our clients keep their asset values and their accounts. They went down, but not nearly what the market did. So that was another big leapfrog for me. And the third thing was when I went into acquisitions, again, almost by luck in the beginning, when the first one came across my desk and I didn't know anything about acquisitions, I really took the time to meet the seller, get to know him, and we both sort of put our faith in each other in the process. And that became a launching point many years ago for my focus on the acquisition business. So that's kind of like a little bit of the common thread that ran throughout the practices.
Regarding most of the clients you bring on, do you work as a team? Talk a little bit about the structure of how you service your clients, or do you take care of most of the clients on your own?
Yeah, we have a team of advisors. I have a team of 3 CFPs, and it's growing. So CFP is a certified financial planner, where you have to attend and study for a rigorous sort of 3-year course to pass an exam that's almost as difficult as the bar exam. In some cases, people think that it is. So I have 3 CFPs on the team and growing. What we do is we take a team approach. When we bring on a client, whether individually or from a firm, we often sit down and work with a client on all the different capacities. So I will focus on, let's say, the asset or the investment management. Another team member helps focus on the estate planning, the wills and the trusts. And another team member might worry about the tax aspects. Now, we don't do taxes ourselves. We find the right CPA or attorney to do that. But we have this integrated approach where every team member is on top of that for the client. And we found that works very well. So that way, if one team member is tied up, the client doesn't just have one person to call. They can reach out and call anybody on that team. And the second thing that makes us unusual, we actually have a daily strategy meeting about the markets. And the reason we do it is not because we necessarily have to make a decision every day, but we want to have a game plan at any moment if the markets change. So by meeting every day for about a half an hour before the markets open, we've done this now for 10 years, we really have strategies ready to implement if things should change dramatically. And the interesting thing about that is most days or weeks or months, not a lot changes. The market can be stable for a while, but usually 1 or 2 times a year, some piece of news like an election or a contested election or whatever will change the dynamic of the market right away. And that daily briefing that we have really helps us become focused on what we need to do for our clients, at that moment in time. So that would be two big things that we focused on over the years.
Thinking back to, the most recent election, where, President-elect Biden, squeaked one out over President Trump. Did you anticipate the bump in the market that came?
Yeah, I would say not directly we didn't, because the theory was at the time, and as we do this recording, you may recall that the two Senate races in Atlanta have not been decided yet. There's going to be a runoff likely in January, and that will tip the balance of power one way or the other. So the feeling at the time was that if Trump remained in office, there might be a nice package going out, to the people laid off, let's say, from COVID. So there was one theory that there would be definitely a package for them. And then the other part was if Biden were to win, that there'd be a similar package maybe going out to individuals, during this COVID time. But what people didn't figure on was that regardless of this sort of contested election, that both parties really want to grow the economy. So the market, I think, picked up on the fact that regardless of who's in office, it doesn't benefit Biden to have the economy tank either. So they're going to want some sort of entitlements package to get out there. And I think the market picked up on that soon after that. No matter who's in office, the goal is to get the economy to grow, and then they may pursue different objectives based on that. So, but that's where we are now. And again, if you wait a month, there'll be another news story coming out that could change that dynamic.
Nothing stays the same, does it?
Never does. And that's the funny, interesting thing about investments. Every day is a new day, and it brings new challenges. But for those of us that love it, it keeps us busy.
What are the, you look back on the things that you've had happen to you in your career, what's been your biggest mistake or misstep in your career that you've learned the most from?
Yeah, I'd say that there's a lot of them. I've made many of them like everyone else. I think the biggest one was thinking, and this person shared a quote with me, a well-known advisor, Ron Carson, said, trying to be the library instead of the librarian. Early on in the career, we think we have to know it all, so we want to be the library. But really, when you think about it, and today with so many things available at our fingertips, between the internet, between podcasts, if you're the librarian, you just need to know how to get the information. You don't have to do it all yourself. So that would be some wisdom to pass on to people. You don't have to know it all, but you want to know, who do I go to, to get that level of information. Looking back, that would have been a big game changer earlier for me.
If you were advising someone about getting involved in this business, what do you think are the three qualities, or a couple, three anyway, of a good investment wealth advisor needs to possess to be successful?
Yeah, and some of these may carry off over to other businesses as well when you think about it. And I'll give you an analogy because having just written a book, there's some same parallels there. Number one, I do like to say the word passion, but passion meaning you really obviously have to have a real joy or get some joy out of what you're doing. In the wealth management business, it can take the form of, I love talking to clients, which is the social aspect. Some people love crunching the numbers, creating plans, and some people love running companies. So figure out, where the joy is for you, because it's not worth doing anything that you don't get a lot of great feeling from. The second thing would be competency. You really want to make sure you have a core competency in something, because in the end, if people are going to rely on your advice, they're going to have to really know, right, that you've proved with licenses and credentials and all that you really know what you're doing. And then the other one is, we used to say competency in caring, right? Sometimes we used to have an expression, they don't care how much you know till they know how much you care. So the key thing is, whether you're a doctor or a physician, right, or an IT person, if you show that caring for people, that you really want to help them get to their goals, then in the end, I think that's going to show through to the people you interact with. So when I'm on the phone with people that are dealing with my firm, not necessarily customers or clients, but vendors, I like to hear, do they have a passion for what they do? Are they competent at what they're doing? And do they really care about the results? Those are things that resonate with me that might help other listeners.
when you look at all the things that you do on a day-to-day basis, what are some of the most interesting deals or clients or, things that you do that you're working on today?
Yeah, so number one, as we speak, I just finished recording the last chapter of my audiobook. And so the analogy there was the discipline,
And
to
I
write.
assume that you're in your studio where you did your recording, right?
I am indeed. I call it the bunker. Before Biden had his bunker, I had mine, just to go on record there. But yeah, I spent a lot of time with the publisher, after having written the book. It took about a year of research and then some writing to actually write the draft. And then you go from there to ebook, and then from there to audiobook. So the first exciting thing was when you're learning to work with audio, as you've found out with all your podcasts, sound makes a big difference. So I had to have a checklist, which I have to this day, of like the 25 things that could go wrong when I start recording, from my generator going on to run a test cycle, to the FedEx guy ringing the doorbell, dropping off a package, to the contractor coming and doing work unexpectedly. All those things really do affect the sound quality. So I had to make sure when I was going to record the book. The second thing was, believe it or not, they taught us this in the course, you almost end up having the diet of an opera singer, meaning that when you go to do recordings, you don't want to have dairy or caffeine and things like that within a day or two of recording, because it's going to affect your voice. And you wouldn't think that, except if you're going to read for an hour or two at a time, it has a big impact on that. So they often taught us, they said, well, if you ever wanted to have an artificial diet, to cut out the sweets and the dairy and the caffeine, this is the way to start it. So that was a learning point for me. And then the software, oh my gosh, the software you learn when you're recording a book, from how to have your voice recorded, how to have it edited. There's a whole different array of things that we learned, and then how to market it, on Amazon. So that's a big, exciting thing going on right now. And I would say the second big launch for us is really meeting these other owners and explaining to them what continuity and succession planning is out there, really helping them figure out in their lives what they want to do with their life's work. To me, that's a joy when someone has spent 20, 30, 40, even 50 years working at something. And I want them to take that, energy and say, what do you want to do in the next chapter of your life and still be financially secure? So that's an exciting part for me right now to look at. So those are two of the big ones.
As a wealth advisor, what changes and trends do you see on the horizon?
Yeah, so the first one clearly is a lot of these larger firms out there, which is why I wrote the book on acquisitions. You're finding a lot more of aggregation going on, just like it did in the banking business, where the big banks bought the small regional banks. Same thing's happening in our wealth management business. You'll have these large multi-billion-dollar RIAs, registered investment advisors, go out and have these acquisitions of smaller firms so that the smaller firm can get access to technology and innovation. So that's a huge thing going on. The second thing that we see going on is this sort of all-encompassing, what we call account aggregation, where everybody wants everything at least under one roof. So they don't want to have to go to 9 different websites to integrate, right, what they're doing with their 401k, their IRA, their life insurance, their long-term care. There's more of an integration or planning concept going on. And the third thing, which affects my generation as much as anyone, is the aging wave, right, of baby boomers as they retire. So not only do you have what that statistic of like 10,000 people a day, turning 60, but you also have advisors turning 60 or 65. And that whole wave of advisors also has to figure out what do they want to do with their own succession and continuity plan.
So how many Vincent advisors are there around the, wealth managers are there around the country?
There's over 500,000 at last count, and they're broken up into different tranches. Some work for the larger wirehouses like Bank of America, Merrill Lynch. Others are independent like myself.
How
some
many independent ones are there?
Independents are they control about half the market share. So to break it down, to bifurcate it, the wirehouses and large investment firms control about 7.65 trillion with a T dollars. And ironically, last year was the first year that the individual independent advisors like me control 7.62 trillion with a T. So ironically, there's these two big behemoths out there. They're both competent, they're both caring, but they each control a very sizable amount of the wealth of the country. And that's a very interesting dynamic that's really unfolding as we speak.
Mhm. If someone were thinking about getting into the business today, what advice would you give them?
First thing is get some really good training. You know, if you have to go with a big firm to get some training, absolutely. You need to have the knowledge and expertise, right? The language of the markets. You want to know what's happening in the stock market, what's happening in the bond market, what's happening with tax law. So definitely get some great training. The second thing is early on in your career, you really have to have a game plan of what your niche might be, right? What type of clientele do you want to go after? Because you can't be all things to all people. You really have to learn what's going to be your calling card, or what they call the value added. That's a big part of it. And the third thing,
in your case, what is yours?
now my value added, which was unique, was two things. We basically give you peace of mind, you know, with prosperity along the way. That's our calling card. The peace of mind is we have a very regimented investment system, which I show clients, which really walks, especially my engineer clients, it walks them through how we do things on a daily basis. And the prosperity part is if they leave all the emotion off the table and let us run, you know, manage the money for their long-term goals, they can then go off and enjoy the very things they want to do, while we have our charting and our systems take care of the money management aspect. And we often integrate that, you know, with our CPA. So peace of mind with prosperity is kind of the way we like to have the tagline.
So if you could have the luxury of talking to your 30-year-old self, what advice would you give that person?
Yeah, that's one of the toughest one, because I often think, as I'm telling my teenager now, right, teenagers don't listen to us. I would say my 30-year-old self, I would have only said, have a bigger picture of the world. In other words, we all thought the world was X, and I said the world's probably 10X or 100X. I would have said, have a bigger view of what's possible out there, because at that time, if you go back to my 30-year-old self, I didn't think the world was as big as it was. I don't mean just in terms of travel, but in terms of, you know, goals and what could be achievable. That would probably be the foremost takeaway. But I will add this. I was proud to say that my 30-year-old self and myself today at 59, I'm still training in martial arts every day. I still do yoga. So I told myself then to never give up the healthcare part of my, you know, my business. I'm going to take care of number one, you know, eat healthy, live a healthy lifestyle so you can enjoy the fruits of your labor. So that part I got right.
Cool. Well, kind of to wrap it up with a final question today, you know, since at least at the recording of this episode, we're kind of in the middle of the second wave of COVID that's coming along. How do you think that things are going to be done differently by all of us going through this COVID, you know, funnel, I guess you could call it a funnel, that we're eventually going to come out of at some point in time? How is the world going to change in your business?
Yeah, so actually, this is a great quote from a Dan Sullivan, a coaching program that Dan's out of Toronto, a brilliant, brilliant mentor to a lot of us. He said, think about this, for the first time in our lifetime with COVID, as bad as it is, you have something in common with everyone in the world right now. Now, when does that happen in your life, when you had one thing in common with everyone in the world? And I thought that was interesting. So how I think it changes is, obviously different cultures respond, but we're going to be a lot more careful, you know, with basically whether it's, you know, masks, 6 feet of separation, all the personal hygiene. That will be something that, in my opinion, you're likely to see lower flu rates over the next few years. I'm not a doctor. I have no specialty, but I believe with everyone being sensitized, you know, to germs and things like that, I think you're going to see a lower mortality rate from the flu. But I think what is going to change in the end is this need for people to want to have more connection than before, because Zoom works well in many things, but I think people are going to have a real thirst and a real hunger to get back to conferences that are value added and meetings to get back to one-on-one when that's appropriate. I think there's going to be a bigger demand than people realize. We're still going to have some fears and some concerns, but I think the very nature of us as humans wanting that close relationship will become a bigger surprise on the other end of this.
Well, those are interesting perspectives. I have heard some of that, but certainly this need for connection I've heard before. But the comments you made about the flu and how our behavior is going to change, and certainly that we have something in common, with the rest of the world, and that I haven't really heard or thought about. So thanks for that insight. Well, Tom, it's been great having you here today on this episode of this podcast. So this is Marvin L. Storm, and we'll see you on our next episode.
Thanks again.
Thanks for listening to the Business Exit Stories podcast. For more information or to reach out to today's guest, visit www.businessexitstories.com for more details. Please subscribe, rate, review, and share this podcast from your favorite podcasting platforms. And remember, maximizing business value at the time of exit doesn't happen magically. It takes planning.